We're starting over, right?
Yep.
Good morning, your relative. My name is Lloyd.
Honey wash day.
He honey washed it. He honey washed it. Good morning. My name is Lloyd Big Crow. Lakota name is Tawapahanta Inaji. My parents are Nick Lane, Crazy Thunder, Herbert Big Crow Sr. I come from Pine Ridge. I'm a male mentor here in Rapid for Oi Luta Okola Kichie. And, you know, we do a lot of, we're trying to help our people heal through our cultural ways and ceremonies. And we just try to walk with them through the process. We do a 12-week Lakota Vichoni class. I help with the Friday meal at the band shell. We've been doing that since 2018. And I'm just pretty much a community advocate, you know, for the elders, youth, and our relatives on the streets.
So this is our take two live. Anyways, this is Toksa Hour. We are doing a special on homelessness. You just were introduced to Lloyd Big Crow. We'll go ahead and let Jake Little introduce himself, and then we'll work back around the horn.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. There you go. All right. Good morning, Jake Little. I'm from Oglala, community member, lifetime community member of the Oglala district, Oglala Sioux tribe. I'm here today representing myself. I've worked many positions with our tribe over the years, about 20 years of service in the tribe. However, here today, I'm not representing the tribe, but representing me, my family, and the Oglala people. Looking forward to a discussion here on homelessness. Thank you.
Jennifer?
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Chase Sloan. I'm from Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Pretty much lived here all my life. I'm a community member, tribal member. My parents are Alfreda Wounded Horse, and my mother and my father is George Chase Sloan. Pretty much lifelong here in Wounded Knee District. We also have a community board here who's active, and they also are aware that there is a homeless situation going on. And also I want to share with you that I began a small nonprofit, Alfreda's Vision here, and we work with the elders here in the community first. And they too had, you know, they have some good things to say about a lot of the feed that's been happening over there, because they have some of their grandkids or, you know, their relatives that are there at Billy Mills. So they appreciated the work. But hello and good morning again.
Duane?
I just want to say good morning to each and every one of you on this platform, and also to all the relatives that will be tuning in this morning. My name is Duane Two Bulls. I'm from the Red Shirt Table community, lifelong born and raised on this Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I just come to the platform today to kind of give a testimonial on our homelessness issue as a community member, as a concerned family member. It's ideal that we all have to bring that gift that Creator God gave us to the table, and to voice our concerns, and to you know, make sure that our relatives are okay first and foremost. And you know, very honored to do the work, and very honored for the teachings, for the skills that I have today. I really say thank you to Maggie, and to Dr. Jen Sierra as well. You know, they have a lot of
So I want to apologize. I really messed this up. So we were streaming live on my personal page. So we had to end it and then start over back over here on Toksa Hour. I don't know. Anyways. And then we also had some technology issues with Jake. So I'm sorry when he turned his video off and then came back on. It was something that we were doing just in Zoom where we're trying to help him turn his video on. And anyways, so I apologize for being a little silly this morning. Our topic this morning is homelessness. And the individuals that are here today do a lot of work in regards to helping homeless people, and even just talking about the economy and trying to find things to our solutions, being solution oriented. As Lloyd was talking about, he has been doing the ban shell, feeding the homeless up in Rapid City. And I've been trying to get Lloyd to come on Toksa Hour for a long time now to talk about his work and efforts and what he does. And then I've been watching where they're also coming down and feeding at the homeless shelter at Billy Mills, right?
Yep.
And so it's really empowering to me, because I always say that we are our own solutions. We have to be our own solutions. And if we don't take the time to try to find the solutions to our problems, then somebody else is going to come along and try to solve them for us. And then we're going to be mad, because that's probably not the best way or the way we should be resolving those issues. And so I wanted Lloyd to just kind of talk about, like, how did you come about this idea about the ban shell and feeding the homeless? And then once we talk about that, then I want to kind of move to, like, where are our homeless people coming from? So if you'll just kind of talk about that a little bit, Lloyd.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. 20 like I said earlier, I was working, and about 2017 I was grieving the loss of my parents, and I went to different kind of Western counseling for grief. Nothing seemed to work, like no matter what I was doing, I had scaring a lot of grief. And I after work I would take walks along the bike path along Rapid Creek, and I would see a lot of our relatives like just walking by and just defeated, and they look defeated. And that's kind of, the look on their face and expressions, and it's kind of like how I felt inside. I felt like just the same way, but something inside me, I wanted to help our relatives, but I knew if I gave them money, I would enable them to continue their habits, or drinking. And so I'd buy sandwiches here and there, and because I felt like just I was. To me, it felt like I needed some kind of hope, or some healing. And one day I just I got off work, and it kind of bothered me for some reason. And then I went to day labor that day. I earned about $75, and then I spent 60 of it going to Walmart. I bought water, those big bags of cheap chips and baggies, and bologna, something simple. And me and my sons, we put together about 40 stack lunches, I guess, and we went down along the creek by the band shop to pass them out to our relatives, and that's kind of how it started. It's just and doing that, it kind of it seemed to lift like that burden of grief off me, somewhat, and and I felt like I did something healing on my end, with me and my shoulders, and the people were like, they were happy, they were grateful, and I was able, to talk with them and ask them what was going on, why they chose to be out in the streets and this, this and that, just and anyway, the next week, I was kind of, I want to continue it somehow, and so I bought the food again, and this time, and at this time too, I'm trying to learn about our culture and our ceremonies and and our way of life, and I give thanks to Creator, because Creator, that day forward, it seemed like he instilled something in me, and I didn't know about how to go about it. I just knew like to follow my heart, and that's kind of what I've been doing is following my spirit, my guide, my spirit, I guess, and someone said pray, pray, so what I would do was, I'd come every Friday. At first, it was like every other week, because I didn't have the means to do it every week. So it started off like I think once a month, then twice a month, and then pretty soon it was every week. And so what I did is I would start the prayer. I would put up flyers at the Hope Center, like places that the relatives frequent a lot, that they're always at, and so and they start coming, and I had like a whole circle of relatives, and I would go up, I'll have them circle up, and we'll say a prayer, and then we'd also, I would azili on them, smudge them off, smudge around the whole circle, smudge, and then say a prayer, and then words of encouragement, and then we'd have them line up like the elders first and the children, and that kind of seemed, because like I said, I was healing, it was grief. I felt like I had a big hole in my heart, for my parents, and the more I did the meals and encouraged the relatives, the more they encouraged me, and it was kind of, it was a two-way street. They actually brought me a lot of healing, so now, I could honestly say, because of that, that big hole I had in my heart from grief, it closed that hole. It's like I found a way to help my grief. It helped deal with my grief, and it actually, really helped me heal. And so, and I realized a lot of our relatives down there were knowledge keepers of our ways. A lot of them knew about ceremonies, about songs, sun dancing. They had all this knowledge, and so, and I just try to encourage them. Hey, you remember who you are. You're Lakota. You're Lakota first. Remember, your spirit. You guys already know that. I'm just here to remind you guys. To just remind you, and I didn't see them as alcoholics or drug addicts. I see them as our relatives carrying a lot of pain. And because like a lot of them were running from their pain, from their grief or whatever. Like someone lost a wife or husband. They lost somebody, or it was even a marriage. They got divorced and never got back up, and they continue to just they want to be free, and to me that kind of made me feel like that's how we always were. We were free. We weren't like 9 to 5, go to work. Like in the Western way. We were kind of like like I feel like our spirits are nomads. Like we just wandered and lived that way of life, but and then they were right in the middle of Rapid City. So when I first started doing it, it was really good. I got a lot of pushback from the Rapid City community. Like a lot of the local natives at first did not support me. They were like, no, like, who do you think you are? You're from Pine Ridge. Like how dare you come up here trying to do what you're trying to do? And then I got accused of doing it for recognition. I got accused of doing it to hustle off our people. But and then I always looked at this from a grassroots effort, and And I was tired of these programs that, like Maggie stated earlier, there's Washishus say they have, they want to help us, but we have to do it their way. And something inside me said, no, we know the solutions to our problems. We know how to address them, but we're really never given that voice. And so I continued on despite all the stuff that was coming at me. I continued it. There's times where I want to quit, but I just kept plugging away at it, and it started being a lot more people, and the people that were coming were from like Eagle Butte, Standing Rock, Rosebud, Pine Ridge, so it's just like like they were coming here to rap it, but they came here to seek a better life, but they ended up like and here in rap it's really racist, and it's really hard to get a job. It's like you have to prove yourself ×3 just to get into some kind of program or company to start working with them. And then if we do, at the time, whenever I was moving to rap it, I'm I have a felony for marijuana. And so it was really hard, like to get a job here. The only jobs that would hire me were either construction or like fast food. And at the time, construction was only seasonal, so I would have to work, I'd be looking for a job for the wintertime. So, I struggled a lot. I was once considered homeless myself back from 2013 to 2016. I ended a relationship, and I gave up my house to go move in with this lady, and it didn't work out. So I was faced with going, having nowhere to go. So I went and stayed at Dakota Rose for 3 years. And I mean I had a place to lay my head, but according to Tucson and these other places, I was considered homeless because I didn't have a permanent place of residency. Because living in a motel is, I was considered a transient. But and I finally got my apartment in 2017. And then from there, just everything kind of started evolving, in a good way. I got like a lot of pushback from the city, from the mayor, from the cops, from the Parks and Recs. They were, like when I first went to the band shop, there used to be picnic tables, and then so we were using those so people could sit down and eat. But pretty soon they took those out, and they were just, they were just coming at me, just trying to make up bullshit laws or reasons not I couldn't do it. And so I read up on their policies and procedures of the park usage, and then and I realized it's like, like they wanted me to get permission from them. But my thought was, what? It's like, we did not give you permission to put this band shell here. So this is, under the Fort Lyman Treaty, this is our land. This is, the Black Hills is ours. And so I told him, I'm not gonna ask for, I'm not gonna ask some white guy for permission to do a simple meal for our relatives. I'm not gonna get permission. I'm not gonna ask for permits. I'm gonna go ahead and do it. And so they were trying to shut me down many times. They're trying to put stuff up in my way to make it hard for me to do this. But I kept going along, and I kept like I stayed close to the creator, and no matter how much pushback I got, I just kept going. I just kept going, and I told them, I was like, we're not doing anything. We're not hurting nobody. We're picking up the trash after ourselves. We're cleaning up. So I kind of, I thought of all the things they would say to try to say that, was bad, like leaving trash or whatever, this and that. So I covered all the bases so they couldn't have nothing to complain about. And pretty soon, they would leave us alone for a while, until people in the community would start complaining about it, mainly the Wasichus, the white community. And so the mayor, and I even invited them down to the mill. I invited the police down, but I said, I told the police, I said, come down, but don't come in your uniforms. Just come in your plain clothes. So they did, because at this time, there was a lot of fights going on, like at the mills, because there's also other mills that other white people do in the community, but like, our people were fighting each other. We were beating each other up at these mills. But with ours, it's, I provided, I had a couple of the bros come down and provide security, kind of like, security, help me out, make sure no one would fight and, would break up fights and stuff. So we invited the cops down because that was their main thing at the time was, it's causing fights. It's causing the gathering for violence. So the cops came down, about 3 of them came down in their plainclothes uniform, and then nobody fought. That day, that mill, it went perfect. And so the cops went back and they told their superiors, and they're like, well, from what we saw, it was very good. It's very well organized. It was very controlled. There's no one fighting, no one, getting out of hand. And so they didn't really have no grounds to stand on to try to shut me down. And then so their next move was, okay, well, you can't do it at the band shell. You have to go somewhere else. You have to go to the skate park or go somewhere else and this and that. And yeah, so it was like a 4-year battle with the city. And to the point where the mayor even got on news. The mayor went on news 3 times, on the local news, 3 times, trying to make us look bad, trying to say that, that our people are shitting and pissing at the park or the band shell. And that was a false claim. And then he tried to say that, we were causing graffiti, but the graffiti was from the local youth skateboarders. They would go down to the band shell and tag it up. And then the feces that he was talking about was duck, because we're by the pond. So there was a lot of feces, but it was from the ducks, from the animals. And so he came on news, and he wanted me to reply to him. So I replied to him. I told him, that we're not doing anything wrong. It's nothing but healing and prayer here, and a mill. And I even invited him to come down to the mill and stand with us. But I knew that was gonna happen, and then he kept asking me to come and meet with him. I was like, I'm not gonna come meet you. You're the one with the issue with us. I'm tired of us always coming to your meetings to come see you, and nothing gets accomplished. You're basically trying to bully us and trying to give us ultimatums. I was like, no. I was like, I'm not gonna reply to you. I will come sit and meet with you, but first you have to come serve with us. Come serve the people. And then, I was thinking about coming to meet with you. And I just basically, ignored him. He was reaching out to me, trying to get people to, like, 3 other third parties, trying to have me come meet with him and this and that. But I was like, I'm not going to. And finally, he sent me an email on Facebook, a personal, trying to have me, Lloyd, I'm sure we can resolve this, and they made a bunch of promises, and which I knew was lies, because I do not, for one, I won't ever trust them. Because they always tell us, things that we want to hear. Oh, we'll do this, but once we do our, do our end of the agreements, they always go back on their word. And so I knew that was gonna happen again. So, and this last time he went on news, and so, so the mill is comprised of, I want to bring the community together, mainly the Native community. And so like, we all shared responsibilities of, like, each different family would bring, say, a side, it's kind of more like a potluck, and I always ask people, I was like, that we're trying to contribute money. I say, no, don't give me money, just buy the ingredients and drop it off, drop off your food, because that in itself was less stress on me, one less thing that I had to do. And plus, it kind of shut up a lot of people that were trying to say that I was hustling the people, or I was trying to, scheme off of our people's hardships. And I said, that's not like that. You can ask anybody, And if it did give me money, it was all accounted for. It was receipts, this and that. But, but my whole thing was to get the community involved, because I want to show the Washishus, the city, that, hey, we can and will help our own people, how we see fit. And we can come together and do it, because at the time they were saying, oh yeah, you Indians, you're always asking for handouts, you just always, this and that, just nothing but negativity. So I was out to show them that, hey, we can help ourselves, and we will help ourselves. And so that continued on, and the mayor was going on, and I completely ignored him. I didn't fire back at him. I didn't say one word. And so it got a lot of the white community involved too, so there was, like, there was, so now we have, like, white people and natives, community coming together, once a week to know each other and help each other out, because there's not only natives that come to the mills, there's also Washishus that are homeless, this and that, and that's kind of how it took off. And then we created, hi baby, and then we created a camp, the homeless camp, because of the city providing services. They were not really providing services. Their city were, but And then so I remember one Friday meal, we went down to the fairgrounds and we set up 4 teepees. And that's where we was gonna house our routes because it was getting cold out. And that was in 2020, I think it was October 2020. And that caused, we set up 4 teepees and we did our usual Friday meal. And then we were surrounded by, the SWAT team and probably the whole Rapid City, the sheriff's office and the police, and they're telling us that we couldn't be there, that we had to take those teepees down, that we were in a floodplain, and what we was doing was illegal, and all this and that. So but we held our ground for as long as we could, and then even like Crow Dog came down, to pray and bless the grounds and try to support us. But the cops just basically told us we couldn't be there. And so we had a little standoff with them, and then we ended up just taking, or I think 7 people got arrested during that time, for trespassing. And but before that, we did our homework, and a week before that, they said it was fine. There's no issues with it. The mayor's office said we could, as long as you're not hurting nobody, you're putting nobody's life in danger. So we went and did it. That's why we did it. We was like, we're not gonna, this is our home, this is our territory. So we went and did that, and then that's how we started the homeless camp in west of town. And we just give them a safe place to stay for the winter. We set up teepees. We had and this is all volunteers. Like all the people that were in charge of the camp. Were all volunteers. Nobody was getting paid, and so and there's only a few of us too. So it was really exhausting. Trying to run a wet camp. Because what we was doing was we was picking up people that were drunk, and we also had to confiscate alcohol because we said no drinking at the camp. But of course, people snuck stuff in. But we did our best, and then we formed a creek patrol, and that was during that same time too, where the cops, there's just different people going along the creek, beating up our relatives, killing them even to some were even killed. So we started the creek patrol, and the city was pushing back on us. They're like, we told them we can help our own, and so they didn't want to work with us. They were like, I mean, they did, but they wanted it. They wanted to control how we did it. They want to control everything. They said they would help us, but it's like, no, we don't want your help because of how you guys treated me in the past. And then so we'd also confront the cops. At the time, like somebody was getting harassed, we'd all run down there and confront the cop. And we was getting in their faces and just telling them off, and they knew we were right, so they couldn't really press charges against us because all we was doing was standing up for our people, because we're tired, we're tired of the way the cops treat us, the city, this and that. So and then the city ended up duplicating our services, and now they have a program called Journey On, and that's run by the city. But before all this happened, the cops, the city was trying to employ me. They offered me a really good job. It was like, it's 55,000 a year, plus rent free, at a house in Lakota Homes. But as long as I was to go, they wanted me to be a community liaison officer between the city and the Native community. But once I kind of seen what they're really about, I walked away from that too. So I was like, no, I really want to help our people. You guys are just trying to make it look like you're helping the natives whenever you guys are still treating us really bad. So I continued on with this grassroots effort, and then I can honestly say it woke up a lot of people in the community. A lot more people started getting involved, and our community kind of started coming together for a while there, and it was something good, and I give praise all to Creator for all that, because I believe it was him. It was Tankonshilas, it was him. He was just using me to be at a certain place there to help our people. But to this day, 2018, our mill is still going. It's 2023. Our Friday mill is still going. We just had one this past Friday as well in Pine Ridge. And so, so to me, I feel like it is healing. There was a lot of people that got off the streets that went back home, and they're thankful for what we did. They're really grateful, and just they said that that little little meal, some people call it little meal, whatever, but it gave them hope. It reminded them of who they were, and it truly did help them. But now, I work with Popcorn Tyon, Gene Tyon, and now, we're in the process of trying to get these same relatives in the treatment into, to get help, for their addictions. So that's where I'm at now, but right now I focus more on the youth and the elders. And so, so now I have another a goal is to help, to talk with our youth, and so I have a youth group every Thursday from 4 to 6 that, we do cultural orientation, and we teach them about who they are and their way of life, because a lot of them don't know. And so also I was invited into the Toksa Society, and because of the work I was doing, because that wasn't nothing I planned on doing, but I said, well, what are the requirements to be a Tokala? And they're like, well, Lloyd, you're already doing it. And so they said they told me it would be an honor if I became, if I joined their society. So that's kind of what I've been up to now. We're trying to get a lot of our young boys, young men into that society to show them, hey, there's a different way other than gangs. This is a way to get back to your community and be part of something, that truly does, love you as a person, and, we'll be there for you. So that's pretty much where I'm at now. But yeah, and the issues with homeless, it's still going. And in Pine Ridge, it seems like there's a lot more people coming from the districts in the Pine Ridge, because I'm sure there's probably no heat, no food, like way out in the middle of nowhere where they live. So it's just, we're just trying to help our people somehow, have that the compassion, and just being a coast again, becoming a community and taking care of each other, And so, but yeah, that's pretty much where we're at now. Thank you.
So, thank you, Lloyd. I always think these stories are really important because we all come from the same place, like we all come from nowhere. And we all come with hardships, and we all struggle. Not one of us is a perfect human being, but yet, we do the work to try to change that and to help others. And so in the chat, Jake, is some comments about the homelessness on the reservation, and Lloyd just a little bit talked about that. And so I was kind of interested. You do a lot of conversation and research about the economy, about like decolonization, just different ways of thinking. And so I wanted to have you kind of talk about some of that. Like, what are some solutions, or what could be done? We have some cause and effect stuff here. So
Yeah, well, thank you, and thanks for that story, Lloyd. It looks like there's a lot of Big Crows on this one. I think maybe all of us are related somehow too. I'm sure, right? Oglala somehow, but that's a good story. And I was just thinking, when you were talking about the city and how they treat you, and what city states are and cities are for, and how they exploit the surrounding areas, and they build walls and keep the indigenous out. Indigenous are inside the city. They don't want the indigenous to behave outside of the norms of what their city state is. Their city states are designed to basically conquer and dominate and take from the surrounding. And that's really interesting to hear that they're still doing that. And of course we know that, and it's a danger for our people to go to those places away from the primary body of the main group, Pine Ridge Reservation. The Oglala is the mass body down here, but some of the things that and I'm sure we could have all kinds of conversations on that, development of nation states and so forth. But one of the things that here, we know the homelessness is rampant. It's getting worse. It's worse in the United States in general than it's ever been. And to me, to start, we have to ask what a home is. Culturally speaking, what is a home? We haven't, we probably had that inherent thought 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and all the elders that were speakers and lived that way, maybe lived more a meager lifestyle or humble lifestyle at one point, not so connected to the outside or different places in the world. They probably understood the concept of a home, and that in visiting around, we talk about the teepee concept, the covering, the comfort that the teepee, the covering offers, all the poles, what they symbolize, the different teachings, and how someone feels safe in there. We don't have a definition. We have an understanding of a home. We don't really have a definition to strive for, and we don't have a homeless definition as well. We rely on HUD and Department of Education. I think the federal system has two definitions, which I think we're giving away our sovereignty. We're avoiding solving the solution locally if we don't develop our own definition. I think our definition has to be grounded in what we seen as a peaceful means of living culturally, and what the teepee provided, what the community provided in that sense, the village and so forth. Homelessness isn't just an individual issue, it's a society issue. Until we start looking at that, we could isolate the 30 people standing around outside at certain points doing certain things and drive on by, but really that's a signal to you that something's going on with you in the society that you're part of. Rapid City could ignore it, all they want, pretend it's just natives or whatever, but really, if they went inside your houses and actually were able to interview people without penalty, you would probably find out a lot of doubling up, tripling up of families. You'd probably find a lack of peace in their homes, which even if you have a roof over your head and it's not peaceful, in our way, that's not a home. So getting back to Pine Ridge and Oglala and so forth, we have people outside, we have people leaving shelters, which, homes, they're basically shelters, a roof. Sheltered and homeless, if you get what I mean there. There's 2, 3, 4 families. Almost everyone keeps someone in their home, and it creates a lot of conflict. And to begin with, some of them homes are rampant with mold, and you're actually killing yourself by being in them homes. So really, that's not a home. If we say, look at it culturally. You're disrupting the peace, the health, the flow of your life. So homelessness, we have the ones actually on the streets, they go somewhere, stay sheltered, some don't, some, find a way to exist right there, when they go back into a shelter, they're still homeless. Families that are living together are still homeless. We have to define and come up with our own policy what homelessness is. I would say about 90% of our people on Pine Ridge are homeless. We're living in an unsettled state. That's just me, just observing, unsettled state, a lack of peace that leads to all kinds of health conditions, social conditions, which we know when there's a problem and there's issues, addictions are natural. People are addicted to everything. It's not just alcohol and some type of drug. There's all sorts of addictions. Humans will gravitate to making themselves feel better for a short period of time. They'll grab a substance or something in society to be addicted to, and it causes disruptions and slows their life down and problems and creates a firestorm. Those are the results of being unsettled, a toxic society. So what are we doing as a tribe to look at what homelessness is, the definition of homelessness? Are we looking at our culture to define what a home is? What are we really looking at? What kind of resources are we putting towards that? Those are kind of things that are of interest to me, coming on a show like this and bringing that about. Maybe someone will look at this and that discussion would start. It isn't natural to have so much despair in any society, even if it's a white society. I think they're in denial. I actually think the U.S. empire is collapsing, There's strong evidence to that. People are turning away from them. Other nations are starting to just say, okay, whatever, America, we're watching you. We see how you treat your own people. When you look at the income and wealth disparity indices, was it 32? They call it the advanced economic countries. The US ranks almost at the bottom of all those, violence, racism, addiction, the crimes, the homeless, you name it, child poverty, they're almost at the bottom of everything. They're collapsing. So where I'm coming from in this conversation is, what is the conversation as a tribe? What are we doing? How are we going to hold leadership accountable? How are we going to hold ourselves accountable? What are we preparing for? To start that, we don't even have a definition of homelessness that we stand on our own and be able to discuss that. We take someone else's definition and then we aid and assist. We have to do that, but we need to take the conversation to another place. So.
I agree with that. Like we don't have a I mean, Jake, you and I have had that conversation, like everybody describes what homelessness is, and whether we fit in their description or not, then it changes. And so as institutions on the reservation, off the reservation, they're going to be following their state guidelines or whatever. On the reservation, like whose guidelines are we following? Are we following the state's guidelines? Or are we following the federal government's guidelines? And this is something I've said before for education purposes. There's funding available from the state for homelessness to help children who are in a homeless, transient state or whatever. And at one time we had some people that described, gave testimony and said that having 5 people or 5 different families living in a home, so you could have like 25 people in a home, was not homelessness. That was culture and so forth. So for reservations then that rely on any kind of assistance to help people who are in need, they weren't able to do that because of the way people had gone and gave testimony in describing what a functioning, that this is a functioning home. To have that many people in it. So it's really important. Good morning, President Starr comes out. He's tuning in. So maybe that's something he will push forward and say, hey, we do need a definition. I was asking Jennifer if she would kind of talk about the work that she started doing in feeding in her community. So go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, good morning. In October of 2021, it was during a pandemic. I came in kind of like a partnership with Lloyd Sr. We stepped up within the community here and we began with the day labor. And with that day labor, there really wasn't no set like what to do, So we sat down, brainstormed, and most of it we seen like towards the end of the month. We had families that would need help with food, or they would need help with just basic, laundry or something moved, or so we sat down and we thought about, how else we could best help, because we couldn't go into homes anymore. COVID was here. So we thought about, well, how about we just kind of help them with the upkeep, the yard, the outside, even like if we could help with their cars. I think what kind of geared us toward the business of going into nonprofit and becoming grassroots too, was seeing the struggles in our community, was seeing how there was educated, able people, but it was like we weren't connecting with our youth anymore. And then we had our elders, but they were still, in a different age era. So we had, like, to me, was 3 different generations. And we had our young ones that began, their families. And the main problem in the home at the time was just a little bit of help with something to eat. So we began the basic foundation for Elfrida's vision. To give you the background on that, I'm the mother to Elfrida Takes Bonnet, who passed away in that explosion in Eastridge. She was my oldest daughter. And in that, the healing that I had to go through, was tough. So what the pandemic brought to us was, on top of our grief and on top of our pain and everything else, if you go out, start working, something's going to come from it. And just always be in the good way, the good thought. And because working in a community, you come across a lot of energies. And we were well aware of that. So, we would smudge, we would do, even in the building, every morning we'd go in, smudge the whole building, pray for our community. And that's how we began getting, the work. We even helped one of our elderlies north of Wounded Knee. She had a big dead tree that was by her home. And, we kept, that's a fire hazard, plus it was by her, the smokestack or whatever the thing is that comes out. And so we got the permission from her and we rented using our own monies, everything from Rapid City, the machinery to come down, cut it down safely, and then in turn turned it into firewood for her home. But the next one was we did some other tree cuttings down on Mouse Creek Road for another veteran. She's disabled, handicapped. We cut the trees down for her so it better accessible for her trash. How the food began was in the business plan that we started up. I had written in there that towards the end of the month, we would like to help with the gift of a meal. And with that gift, it involved, a meat, which preferably is buffalo. And the second is beef. And then the third is chicken, So it's just something that could help towards that end of the month with your dry goods. But in those dry goods, it should be, healthy. Try to get your vegetables in there, try to get the fruit in there, try to get all the good oils, the good fats. And I was really, really, really thankful when we met with Jerry Baker in Rapid City. We had that food summit up there. That was the first time I ever went. And I was carrying around my business plan. And I came across Jerry Baker and I told her where I was from. And I asked her, she remembered I worked with her before because I used to do the sponsorship for the children whenever my kids were all in grade school at Batesland. So all the families here used to have sponsors back then. And she remembered that time. So I brought her my plan, showed her kind of, it's like a big, huge, like dream big, the plan. She was like, so you really want to start, helping them with a little bit of food, and then you're going to do gardens, and then you're going to go, into bigger, because we even have a third step. So I told her, well, yeah, yes, and She laughed a little bit and she said, "Well," she said, "let's sit down, let's talk." So we did. I already done all the basic groundwork for that. I kind of knew how much families were here, how many were in each home, where our bigger ones were located. Also, I identified our heart patients, cancer, dialysis, and also we did like for the ones who are the babies, like the children that had special milk. It wasn't often we got that, but when we did, I made sure those parents got it. We didn't really work just in Wounded Knee community. We began reaching out to others. We would go Sharps Corner, Cryo, Martin, Evergreen, Porcupine, Manderson, Pine Ridge, Calico, and Oglala. And most of the times, the others who contacted, they would come to the building. So when we began, it was 40 elders that we had here. So they would get 40 food vouchers and I would pass them out. And I introduced myself then, and I introduced Alfreda's vision. And from there, we worked our way up to 50 food vouchers. And then from after that, we worked the way up to 100 families. And that's when we started with Feeding South Dakota. So in that, we had to look for transport. So because we were basically doing everything with our own vehicles, our own pickups, my spouse has a pickup, and I've always tried to have a, Yukon or a Tahoe, just basic to fit boxes in there. Most we'd get is 25, but with the pallets or anything else, it's the pickups with borrowed flatbeds. The flatbeds we would get from the neighbor down the road, Michelle Ecofee, the late Gilbert Ecofee's wife, and also housing. Housing pitched in a lot, and I was really thankful for that, because when we started moving that food, we were moving 1,500 to 2,500 pounds, and not to mention the 700 pounds of the buffalo meat from One Spirit, the hamburger, the pork loin, the chicken. We had freezers that One Spirit helped us with, along with 10 shelving units. They have wheels on it. So what we would do is we asked here at the community level, the building here, and we got the go ahead. They said, do what you have to, but be safe about it. So we set up our system, housing. Once they're told that we did our food order and wrap it, they would get a driver up there who would load it up on flatbed, and they would bring it back. So we'd get it here to the community, and then from there we have our community volunteers, and most of them too were the day labor, but others would be like our mothers or the aunties, who'd come up and give their time. So we'd get them all out, get it out onto the loading dock. We have dollies, we have the pallet jack, so it was easy to move them in. So we'd have like at the most 5 on each side, and then we'd take them all out, put them onto the shelves, and then we'd make the boxes that way for the families. Basically in Wounded Knee community, it was each family. And if there was like 2, 3, 4, 5 in that household, well, they got 4 or 5 boxes. And it just, for me, it was just to help. It wasn't nothing that we were trying to gain anything other than, that good feeling, staying young, keeping healthy, fit, because it's a lot of work. We do a lot of it in prayer. I know I do. It's kind of real how, I don't know how to say it, but we experienced a lot of negativity. We were attacked, lied about, we were stolen from. We had buffalo meat stolen. We had some pork loin, some chicken. And it's kind of like you find out who did it because they would be the ones selling it, or, you know, somebody would talk about it. We've experienced a lot of rumors. We don't get paid. There's no money in this. The gas money and everything that I've had, and that the oil changes, things like that, that's my spouse. That's Dale Bear Safe's life. And then I had Lloyd. He's my business partner. So when he had his PP or whatever loans those were, he really helped the community then, because we had means to like donate for propane for the lights when they got shut off. We were really getting like into the flow of it. But I believe that when it's kind of when the negative comes, it doesn't come alone. And they came in like numbers. But I know that throughout all this, that they seen how hard we've worked. We've also kept the community clean. We've assisted in the wood. And how that came about too was when that was started, we bought chainsaws because we didn't have any from the district, from the COVID monies. And we had the help of our council representative at the time was Councilman Rodriguez. And he bought a chainsaw. All these were new. I bought 2, and that's what the gentlemen in the community were using. And that's how we kept our wood for our families here, because we originally started with 13 families on wood. And at the end of October last year, 1 year, we serviced up to 42 families. And that was just using our own chainsaws. The log splitter, we got assistance with property and supply. So all in all, it was just beginning. It was like, it was going, but eventually it comes to a point where they assumed I was working for the tribe first. They tried to get me fired. The second one was, they said I was working for housing and I was reported to housing. I don't know for what, probably, giving food away. I don't know. But they found out I wasn't employed there. So next, they found out I was a volunteer. And we're still making moves. We're still here. We didn't do the food since January because I had fallen outside the building, and I didn't know at the time it was that hard of a fall. But I ended up breaking my bone right here above my shoulder. So I was pretty much kaput. I couldn't work. The volunteers we had at the time, they kind of see the negativity, and it's kind of a lot to endure. So I just kind of, just slowed down. I didn't stop. I just slowed down. And Jerry has, they've really been wonderful, because they gave me the break that I needed to heal. I'm actually, I would say, second week into being, she said I could go back to work, but I can't lift. I can't do anything else, but I still have the right arm. So I do, just basically what I can. We're going to continue the food. We're going to start that back up again. This time we'll be working with Percy White Plume, and he will be coming over to get the food for the community of Manderson. It's just basically to help. It was just to assist at the end of the month because there is already other food, help there. Many homes still get like the EBT, first of the month, general assistance. They get WIC, things like that. I had to look at all that. And so at the end of the month, it was just to help. So when I met Lloyd Big Crow, that's at the height of all the stuff in Rapid City. I started becoming aware of the work that him and Hermes was doing. So we went up there, started showing some support. My partner Lloyd Out has been at the protests and things like that. We're for the people. We're not here trying to take over anybody's throne. We're just here to help, and that's just all. The only message that I went out there is that we got the heart, and I'm pretty sure there's a whole bunch of like-minded Dakotas on the reservation like us that are personally driven, just to do some good, just to be the good, to show the light. While we're here, we're gonna need your guys' help, your support. And thank you very much, Maggie.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for all that work. I watch your stuff on Facebook, and you've been a watcher or a follower of Toksa Hour and always commenting and things and giving information. So I want to thank you for all of that work. And a lot of times we forget that, again, we are our own solution. Like, we have to be the answer. Like, we have to do the work. We can't sit and look at the tribe because the tribe ain't doing it right. We can't look at the federal government because the federal government don't even recognize us as individual Indians. They recognize the tribe, and so it just is defeating the purpose. And so we have to be the solution. And so we're coming up on the end of our time here, and Duane is going to talk about himself. And Duane is the youngest participant in this hour, and so he gets the last discussion. And like he said before, Duane is one of my students, and he always calls me his big sister. But he is one of my students, and I'm very, very proud of him and all of his work that he does. And so I want him to kind of talk about that because he's the youth, he's the younger generation. I think the rest of us are all probably considered Gen Xers or whatever. And so here comes Duane to talk about, like how his generation is stepping up to these things. So, okay, Duane.
Okay, I just want to say thank you, Maggie, once again. Okay, very appreciative of everything come this far. But I just kind of to follow up on Brother Lloyd's testimony. I've been in Rapid City the past 10 years. Right as soon as like high school was over, I made my way to the Black Hills, and just to like, as many people do, to try to have stability, to have sustenance, with working and stuff. So I was rather in the workforce really earlier on. Even in high school I had jobs. So like with all that history, and then in there, just taking observance of our people, taking a good account of everything going on. Me myself, my father, Duane Two Bulls Senior, he was like one of the ones that ran the pack over there at Camp Justice and White Clay. So I grew up with that dynamic of having like an alcoholic parent and stuff, and so like with that, and my father, he passed away in 2006. He was ran into coming out of White Clay, and he was taken out by a drunk driver. So I suppose with all that, being exposed to death at a very early age, I think I was only like 13 years old, and watching my dad get killed, it really changed me. It really moved me in such a way where, man, we can't be doing this. We can't be letting this happen. And then along the way, just having different family members pass away of alcoholism. And I have a Tui up in Standing Rock, Phyllis Young. I'm very appreciative of her efforts and her encouragement during this time of me going through the grieving process and stuff. And she told me, she said, now is the time, that you have your loved ones out there. You have your father. You have these beautiful testimonies of overcoming, and now that it's in a way where things are eternal. Your sister, your father, they're in the spirit world now, so you can start acting out on wellbriety. You could start engaging wellbriety events and stuff. And so I took that into high consideration, given everything that we're going through as a Lakota people, as people of the next generation, trying to step up, trying to observe. And these dynamics, they can be overcome, with, if you have to apply your mind, your body, and your spirit. If you truly want to change, you cannot remain the same. And that is, I'm very thankful for those teachings as well, because it was a lot of endurance. It was a lot of perseverance to come from 2006, just a young adolescent mind, to where I'm at now today. I'm 30 years old, and I'm very thankful, the creator kind of put things in our path in the ways that he did, because it's all like experience building. It's all about being there for the people, and then also taking insight with our history, our culture, our heritage. In our Two Bulls family, we come from a long line of chief lineal descent. And so, like, knowing that, it just kind of empowered me. I said, well, gee, we come from a chief's family. We come from long line of spiritual people, spiritual leaders. Then, well, like, it's our duty then, as the descendants of this chief's family, to step up to the plate and to really help out with our people, because that's what our chiefs did back then. They were all heart and no fear, and they led from the bottom up and from the back forward. So that's the type of work that, I put into this. I give it all my heart and my prayers, because there are a lot of the relatives out there today that suffer from colonized thinking, and like, just the fact that we have to rise above with love first and foremost, because uh these mindsets, these actions, they're only of the US government. you know um so, like, with our relatives, um like, going back to Rapid City, I can honestly say, I watched Brother Lloyd rise from all those ashes. I watched him, like a phoenix, flourish to where he's at today. And I remember whenever he was first starting, and I remember, I said, oh wow, it really struck me. And then and then we started to engage more, and to conversate more. And then eventually he invited me to say prayers and sing some songs at the band shell. So that was really moving for me, because if my father was still here today, that's probably the crowd that he would have been in. And it all stems from white clay. Like, after the tribe shut down white clay, after the movements that took place at white clay, I can honestly say I was there too, holding it down with the sheriffs, and from all that, and all the way to, the actual closure of white clay. And then also seeing the relatives, like, gather and head up to Rapid City. So after White Clay, that's where a lot of the relatives landed, and then also from the other 8 other reservations that were coming in. So I knew that it was a growing issue. I knew that, there's going to be more efforts coming about. But what struck me in my eye was seeing Brother Lloyd, and how he persevered and how he endured all of that all of that challenge. It just made a way for blessings to happen. So I just want to very am thankful, for that journey, because if it wasn't for that journey, my eyes wouldn't be as vigilant as they are today. And it is out there, this homelessness issue, like how you said, Maggie, is very it's very crucial, because this is our issue. This is, with it being our issue, then we should be the ones trying to come up with a solution, and so far from what I gather, um this band-aid solution, it only goes so far. This handout solution, it only goes so far. So that like very thankful for the efforts that were brought, because the Igloo Tetra program, Abram, he also works under Petuluta Otipi. And I don't know what happened, but I know, like, back in January, they were starting to start to, because he has the authority or the okay to do alcohol and drug evaluations. And I was really hoping that he would start getting those types of things on the ground for our relatives, so that they could really dig into their trauma. They could really dig into their hard time, because from what I gather, these relatives are the prime products of genocide. And, like, I could not see it in any other way other than just being shown a colonized way all their life, and having no coping skills to deal with it. And then much of these relatives, come from boarding school era as well. And in this boarding school era, it just brings a lot of fear base. And so with fear base, it's kind of hard with our relatives, because they struggle with it, whether with it's their addiction or just their attitude in life in general. And my grandpa, he calls it a sickness of the mind. And so it can be killed. They always say, when you try to shift your mind thinking, try to switch around your thought process, then things can happen. A shift can happen. And so I kind of just go along with that, and I try to just be in a prayerful state. I guess Brother Lloyd and all the others that are in this effort, I'm very thankful for, because it wouldn't have been possible. And it was, like I said, it was like right before Thanksgiving, back in, say, 17, 18 weeks ago. uh we, the driving force, and the, I would say, the great spirit, creator God, he was there with us, whenever we started this initiative to bring the homeless meals back to Pine Ridge. And it kicked off in such a way where there was a lot of food, there was a lot of meat, a lot of products to start helping with these Friday meals. And with that, it brought a lot of like, I could say the energy was really high. It was really positive, because it was something good, and we were all feeling good from doing it. And come this far, like, it's very I would say it's very important. It's very key and ideal to uphold that. We have to be there. We have to step out of our comfort zones. We can't just be within our homes all comfortable all the time, because other issues are going on. And then, like, how Brother Lloyd said, that we're Lakota first. And so with that, it should have just, we all have to kind of come together in such a way where, we're the main focus is trying to abolish these issues amongst our relatives, because at the end of the day, it's them that are gonna, like, be cold, or they're manning the elements, and they have no problem doing it. But it's just the fact that us, the people, the ones that are adhered to this colonial system, like, we're trying our best to decolonize our minds, shift our mindsets, and try to have that common cause, and bring it together, where I always say, bringing that Wolakota mindset back, because it's hard, it really is, going up against these toxic behaviors, toxic actions, and all that stems from, again, um, like colonial mindset. So I guess it could go on and on and on about this issue, but I'm very thankful that at the end of the day, the common cause is that like those like the warm hearts are gonna gather, and I encourage each and every one of the relatives out there to do so. You know, help in some kind of a way, because whenever we challenge ourselves, keep ourselves moving, that self-driving force, you know, it only paves the way for something good to happen. And that's how I stand firm, and like from standing in Rapid, helping out Lloyd, praying for the relatives, and then bringing it all the way back here to Billy Mills Hall. That was something in my life, and seeing like, wow, the prayers surely can work, and merely that's where all this started from, was a simple prayer, and now it's going big, and now that with the issues that are out there right now, you know, I know that Dakomani, we have that mindset, Dakomani. Nevertheless, you know, it's gonna go on, and I really encourage, thankful for Jennifer and Brother Lloyd, and uh, the ones that are on Ground Zero and Pine Ridge, that are dealing with our relatives each and every day, because they don't have a chance to go into the Inipi, or they don't have a chance to go to the Black Hills and say prayers. They're just stuck on Ground Zero, and they wouldn't have it any other way. But I guess that's where like all of us different ones come in with our prayers and to help support, because that's the main driving force at the end of the day, is our people. You know, we come from long lines of spiritual and chief people, so we honor that bloodline, and we have to keep that going, you know, those good relations going on into the generations, because no matter what, these young people, the next generation, the seventh generation, they're all looking at us no matter what. And I just hope that this all these things that we do is gonna spark their mind someday, and and then in there, consulting with our elderly folk, our elders, our grandmothers, those of us that have them, you know, very thankful, because that wisdom is key in this ideal process of dealing with our people. And it's not an easy job, but those of us that have that driving force and that warm heart, and you know, it's all gonna be good. It's all gonna be blessed by the Great Spirit, Creator, Heavenly Father, God, Tungashila. You know, it's all gonna be a blessed thing. And so just kind of have to keep our eyes on the prize, and very thankful, you know, just. And then that's another thing, whenever we put that gratitude out there, it's going to find its way back around some way, shape, or form. So just kind of things, you know, for the relatives to think about, and to take into consideration. You know, all of this is done with no money whatsoever, other than just having waunshila, compassion. And we need more of that, you know. Like grandma and grandpa is no longer here, you know, for some of us. And I guess that my generation is the prime generation that has to carry those values on, that value system, because our young people are also lost, you know, on a path where we have to also reach out, and we have to challenge ourselves again, you know. So I guess it's just we're not meant to be comfortable. You know, we're only spirits. We're here on this earth one time, and so I guess that's how we have to make our imprint.
Be quiet. I'm going to talk. Be quiet.
So with that, you know, I just want to say Wopila again, you know, to this platform, and uh the efforts combined that are coming together, and the voices, you know, this conversation needs to happen and needs to be put out there, you know. And I encourage my relatives to take it in such a way where it's going to be a beautiful blessing for each and every one of us. You know, we all have the eyes on the same prize, and we all might as well kind of bring it all together with everything and every skill, mindset, leadership set that we have, you know, because it's needed. And these relatives here, they don't know those things, you know. They're fear based, so it's really hard that we have to challenge our relatives, but in a good way, things and good blessings can happen. So Lila Wopila.
Thank you. Gee, that was a lot of good words. My granddaughter keeps coming in here like, are you done yet? It's giving me a hard time. I'm like, be quiet now. We're going to talk. I'm going to talk. Be quiet. So she took some food and went out. She's looking for her donuts. So I just want to thank everybody for coming on. This is a really necessary conversation because it's ongoing. And we know there's systemic issues about homelessness, about being hungry, about lack of service in community. And so we know that. And so I'm really thankful for you guys coming on, because what you do is you give us the ability to uplift, because you're showing us you guys are just like we're all the same people, and just having the ability to do it, and not even knowing how you're going to do it, pulling out of your own pockets and doing it. And that's really important to see. In the chat, there's a lot of chat going on in regards to the recent issue in Pine Ridge. And so for those people that are watching that don't really know, Pine Ridge the tribal council had given Pine Ridge, the homeless, I can't remember exactly what but Abram, can't even think of his last name, but he
Newman.
was, what is it?
Abram Newman.
Yeah, Abram Newman. Anyways, he was the one that went before council and started to do the homeless shelter there. And they let them lease the Billy Mills Hall. This past week, the Law and Order Committee took action to evict them, and citing numerous allegations of things that have taken place there. And so they were served with an eviction notice from the vice president. And that was all sent to me. I looked at it and I immediately started asking questions, and I called my own council reps, and I'll tell you, Davey Puyer is the only one that answered. And I asked him, like what, and I told him all this stuff, and I asked him if the Law and Order Committee or the vice president had the authority to overturn tribal council action. He said no. So I asked, why was that done like that then? And why are they having the vice president write such letters when our tribal president is sitting in his office on that very same day? Why are they having the vice president write eviction notices? And so this becomes a big old constitutional thing. It's almost like you can get an impeachment complaint on this because you violated tribal council action. And so that has to go back to tribal council. They're the only ones that can undo it, unless they specifically said in their resolution that at any point we'll give these people the act to undo it. And so in the chat, they're asking for people to know that on Tuesday is tribal council. It's their regular session. Tuesday, they are on the agenda, I believe, and they're asking people to come and support the homeless shelter, or we need to come up with solutions. And so I'm really thankful again for you guys coming on and talking about the ways in which you rose up in your own communities to address an issue, because systemically it's not going to happen. It's like we have to be involved. And so for all of the people, Abram and the people involved there doing that, I want to say thank you guys. Thank you for caring. Thank you for doing. And if any of you listening can call your council people, I would suggest that you do so. Call your tribal president, call your executive board, and give support to our homeless, and ask them to find solutions. What are the solutions? Because we need to find them. And again, thank you guys for watching. Duane and I had this little bit of a conversation. What do you say on a live? Do you say thank you for tuning in? Thank you for what? Anyway, so thank you for watching. You guys all have a good Sunday. Next Sunday, we will have another conversation on homelessness, and Deb Tobacco will be coming on talking about how tribal programs, institutions, and organizations can help the effort to address homelessness. So with that, you guys all have a great day. Toksa.
Oh, we'll see ya.
Doksha, have a good day, guys. Doksha.
Have a good
Doksha.